So, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webcast on the subject of encouraging people to learn. My name's Jo Dowdall. I'm from Catalyst Consulting. I've been in training for about 12 years or so with a background in continuous improvement. So lots to share with you on this subject today. So if you do have any questions or comments to make at any point during the session today, you can click the raise your hand icon, or if you wanted to be brave and come on and ask a question, you can unmute yourself as well. So please feel free to interact as you might normally do so. I'm on LinkedIn as Jo Dowdall, so if you wanted to ask any questions later on, please feel free to do so as well. So thanks for your time and attention today. I know for some of you it might be your second webinar of the day, so we'll try and keep okay. I've just been muted and unmuted. Okay, so off we go. So this is a fascinating subject about encouraging people to learn, and learning is quite a personal thing. So share with you some tools and some models and some best practices in that area. And first of all, a little introduction to Oxlet, which I'm sure you know all about. So Oxlet provides support for organisations, helping them to recruit and retain staff and a whole lot more. I've got Mel and Katie on the call this afternoon, so if you have any questions about Oxlet, I'm sure they'd be happy to help as well. And today's subject kind of dovetails with another initiative that Oxlet are supporting, which is the Kickstart programme, helping young people at risk of long-term unemployment into the job market, so funding placements for 6 months for young people inside organisations. So helping with learning, really, imagining having kind of an apprentice or a placement in the organisation and what they would need to know. So quite a relevant subject, and you know, something that's been impacted by changes in our lives this year as well. So off we go. Okay, so in today's session we'll cover off what is a learning organisation. We'll look at different types of learning, because it's not just about what happens in the classroom, it's something that can happen anywhere and everywhere. We'll think about what makes a learning organisation, so thinking about the type of things that we can do and the way that we behave that supports learning and really brings things to life. We'll talk a little bit about remote working as well, and we'll talk about kind of different needs for older and younger learners. So having spoken about, you know, people on the Kickstart programme, for example, let's have a think about the needs of young learners might be different to our own, and I count myself as an older learner. Okay, we'll also just have a quick look at induction training as well, because it's an employee's first taste of training in an organisation, so it's quite an important one to get right. So I'm not big on ground rules, but I would please ask you to stay until the end today, and there'll be a feedback form issued to you after the session with some other information from the Oxlet team. So please do fill that in, and please just relax and enjoy. So to kick us off then, we'll just have a think about what is a learning organisation. So I found some definitions, and actually these quite build on each other quite nicely. So when I first started, I went to Peter Senge, who's kind of an authority on this kind of thing in organisations, and he talked about organisations where people can continually expand their capacity and create results and desire new and expansive patterns of thinking. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant, because I think we've all had to do that this year when we've been faced with so many challenges and so many decisions to have made. And you know, I think, you know, a lot of changes were already happening, but I think COVID's kind of pushed things to happen more quickly. For example, you know, doing a workshop in this way rather than, you know, face to face as we might be otherwise. So I felt quite okay about that, and I thought actually it's within our reach. And then I went to another definition which said a vision of what might be possible. So it started to feel something a bit more aspirational. And the second definition says it's not brought about simply by training individuals. It can only happen as a result of learning at the whole organisation level. So it's not just a bit of training, there's a bit more to it again. And then going on to the third definition, characterised by total employee involvement. So it's something that everybody in the organisation is doing. It's a process, and we'll talk more about a learning process as we go on. And it's something that, you know, people are working towards shared values or principles. So the learning that they're doing is taking them somewhere desirable. So some really good definitions just to get us thinking what learning really is all about in our organisation. And this article in Harvard Business Review by David Garvin provides some useful building blocks of what a learning organisation actually is. So now we know it can be quite an aspirational thing, and there's a lot to it. How do we actually do it in real life? Okay, so the first step is to create a supportive learning environment, and this is massive actually in training. So you might have come across the expression psychological safety. It's something that lots of organisations are talking about at the moment, and it's this atmosphere where learners can feel safe to learn and safe to admit that they don't know something. And actually, when you are doing that, can be potentially making yourself quite vulnerable. So it's about creating an environment where people feel safe and supported in that vulnerability. Okay, so this atmosphere of psychological safety and team spirit and support through each other's learning. And we'll look at leaders' involvement in a learning organisation, but leaders have a big part to play in establishing psychological safety when their people are learning. Okay. It's about being open to new ideas, so opening up and recognising different ways of thinking, providing the time and space to do it and the training tools. So things like this don't happen on their own. They need a mechanism almost to make them happen. They need tools and techniques, and they need time and space and resources to make it happen. So this is about kind of putting your money where your mouth is really, and providing those resources. It kind of goes hand in hand with the next building block, which is a learning process. So again, kind of things don't happen by accident, do they? Having a process, a solid, well-defined process for learning is really, really useful, because you know, without it, we could be at risk of not doing ourselves justice, or not doing our learners justice, not being consistent, and not getting all the value we can get out of learning. So thinking about a process as a series of steps, isn't it? And a process transforms inputs into outputs. So think about our learners going through a process and what they'd be like on the other side of that process. And it's interesting to think, if you were developing that process now with a bunch of post-it notes, where would it end? Where does the learning process end? You could say it goes on forever, really. So thinking about kind of what we do before, during and after learning to really help our learners excel. Okay, a bit of experimentation in there as well. So it's another kind of buzzword in business at the moment, trying things out to see what works, and then adapting and adjusting appropriately. So doing analysis, learning about the results that we're achieving, and looking to adjust and adapt to build on what's working well, and amend where there's potential to do even more. Okay, so excuse me, leadership behaviour is a really important aspect here, because if leaders walk around and show that this stuff is important, it becomes important to everybody. So we're looking for leaders to role model some of this stuff. And how can they do it? It's a behavioural thing, and it can be quite difficult, can't it, to change behaviour. But there are some things here that leaders can start to do to build this learning ethos into their organisations. So questioning and listening, again, kind of being open to different points of view and being prepared to debate and discuss the alternatives is massive, rather than just this idea of I must be right because, you know, I get paid the most. And that was something I heard about Lehman Brothers Bank, actually. They said, why would we listen to somebody that doesn't get paid as much as us? So recognising that, you know, everybody has a valid point of view, and really listening to those points of view. Okay, so again, providing the time and the resource, the space to learn, and, you know, enforcing a process that works for their people. Okay, so thinking about your organisations then, and thinking about those three blocks, might be useful to reflect afterwards on those different elements and how well established those might be. So I did mention learning online earlier on, because that's what some of us are having to do here. But I also should mention learning in the classroom and in the training room, because I know some people still are, working and learning in their workplaces. So how do we foster learning? And I think these things on this slide actually apply to kind of the traditional kind of classroom or training room environment. Okay. However, when you look at what's on the list, it doesn't feel very traditional. It feels quite different. And this is what we call training from the back of the room. Okay, so breaking the schooling myth. So if you think about school, you think about rows of learners, don't you? With, taking everything in, copying things down, being told to do exercises, but maybe not having much opportunity for debate and discussion and activity. I think it was like that when I went to school, actually, although I think things are changing. But thinking about, encouraging discovery and encouraging people to kind of be creative, explore through creativity in their learning. Providing opportunities to experiment, to try things. So when I'm training groups of people on tools and techniques for continuous improvement, for example, we always try the tools that we're talking about. People get to have a go, and that's really where the learning really happens. I did that and it worked quite well, or I did that, or it could be better next time. And I suppose it goes hand in hand with this psychologically safe environment where people feel comfortable to stand up and have a go. Okay, being able to enable people to learn from one another. So recognising that people that come along to training have got a lot of input that's valuable. So hearing from others in the group about what they know can be quite a valid way, because people respect their peers and recognise the experts that there are around them. Okay, working in groups is another way to encourage kind of training from the back of the room. So encouraging people to learn and explore together rather than just on an individual basis. I think you can get a lot more out of an activity when you could compare and work together to make something happen. And I suppose it reflects how we work as individuals as well. We're not just on our own, we do work with people, and having those conversations is actually the way we get things done. So resources we've spoken about, and giving workers the freedom to learn. So things like not just sitting down, things like having a go, things like not letting the trainer do too much talking. Actually, if I'm training and I'm doing all the talking, I always think I must be doing it wrong. Breaking things up to allow people to have their voice and have their say, becomes their learning experience, not just a one-way kind of download of information from my mouth into somebody's head. Okay, so this idea of the learner taking quite an active role in the learning that they're doing. Okay, so having said that, there are different learning styles to be mindful of. People do prefer to work in different ways. So this tool by Honey and Mumford was developed to build on a kind of an existing learning styles model that kind of seems a bit dated now. So Honey and Mumford actually looked at the way people behaved. So for example, do you use a map when you're trying to find your way to get somewhere? So looking at kind of day-to-day behaviours and then using those outputs to identify what kind of learning preference that people would have. Okay, so 4 brief types of learner here. So just to whiz through these, and you can get more information through this website. So activists really do throw themselves into learning. So if they're working with others, they'll probably be leading the group, throwing themselves wholeheartedly into a new experience. You're happy to kind of roll their sleeves up and get things done. They don't necessarily care about being right all the time. They're just really happy to be active, really, in doing what they're doing. On the opposite side of that, almost, we have reflectors. So reflectors like to observe and think and consider the options. So these are the people that might seem quite quiet during a training course, and it's probably because they're not engaged, it's probably because they're reflectors, they're thinking about things, they're thinking things over, and they might come back to you later on with some questions. So they might struggle with too many activities because it's not their way. They like to kind of think, they'd like to have time to think about things. So breaking things down, breaking sessions down might be a good way to support your reflectors. Okay, so they might seem cautious. They like yeah, they like time and space after a training session to really think. Okay, we have pragmatists. So pragmatists really like to have a go, and while you're training them, they're probably thinking, yeah, but how do I apply this in my role? So they like to try things out. They like to link things to what's happening at the moment. They might be a bit impatient. Oh, enough theory, let's have a go. So quite down to earth and practical in their approach. And we have theorists who love kind of the models, the concepts, the facts. They'll read the white paper, on the thing that you're talking about, and they like certainty in what they're doing. Okay, so they like to have a clear purpose and a structured situation and have kind of boundaries around their learning, because it helps them to kind of open up and learn as they need to. Okay, so they'll question and probe. There's a lot going on, and they're really kind of thinking about, the complex kind of things that tie what you're telling them together, and their minds are whirring away while you're talking. Okay, so it brings us a massive opportunity, doesn't it, when we know that we're working with people with different styles and preferences, but it also brings us a bit of a challenge, because we need to recognise we might have some from all of these 4 groups in a training session. So we need to think about different learning styles and kind of some do's and don'ts, which I found these to be really, really useful. Okay, so having a blend is always a really useful thing. So for our activists, they want to be actively involved. They like having a problem to solve or a challenge. They don't like being talked at a lot. They're not necessarily into, some of the analysis tools. And they're probably, if you're giving them quite detailed instructions for an activity or a training exercise, they probably get a bit impatient with that, because they just want to get stuck in. Okay, if you think about your reflectors, they don't like being put on the spot, so try and give them a bit of time to think before, asking them to comment on something or to do something. So building some thinking time into activities can be really helpful with them, building some follow-ups into training activities as well. They like to be prepared, and they don't necessarily want to take the lead in the group, and that's fine. They're learning in a different way. Okay, so now let's think about the pragmatists then. So they like to get feedback from an expert. They like it when you have the authority on that subject who's practically done it, and lived the experiences. So, too much theory and not enough action can upset a pragmatist. So having this practical focus is really, really useful. So having an example or a role model, to work from is really helpful for those guys. Okay, they like clear guidelines on how to do it. They're always thinking about, what do I do about this? So if they've got some guidelines, they've got something to work with, and they like it when there's something they can do straight away after the training. Okay, and if we just flip to the theorists, you probably know how it's going to go now with these people. So structure and a clear purpose, so clearly defined learning outcomes before every session, so they know where they're going and they know what they're working to, and they can fit why we're doing this back into their kind of scheme of information in their own heads. Okay, so you can back up ideas and activities with theories, models and systems. So taking it back to the model can be quite useful. It gives them, I guess, boundaries and comfort in those boundaries. Okay, they don't like the kind of feelings, learning by feeling, can make them feel quite vulnerable, whereas an activist would throw themselves in there and feel all the feels. They like to be prepared and have the appropriate knowledge before they're thrown in there. Okay, so that might sound, some of those might sound like you or people that you know or people that you've worked with, and it's really good to know this stuff, isn't it? It's good as an individual, because you can carve out activities and methods of learning that work exactly right for you, and it's really good if you're delivering the training, because you can structure and blend your activities to suit all of these different types of learner. Okay, so really useful to know who we're working with, who are we, what kind of learners have we got. And if you wanted to send people a copy of the Honey and Mumford model, quick questionnaire to fill out, you can find it on this website link on the slide. Okay, and that will be sent to you after the session. Okay, so I don't know if you've come across VAC learning. So VAC stands for Visual, Audio and Kinesthetic, and again, kind of another different take on styles of learning and what appeals to certain types of learner. Okay, when I did this test over the summer, I realised I'm a visual learner, and it's helped me such a lot actually, even since then, and even having been a trainer for such a long time. I haven't done this questionnaire for ages, so it's been a bit of a revelation. So things about visual learners, then they can remember faces and pictures, they recognise things, but they might not know the name. They know they've been down this road before, but they don't know what it's called. Okay, they can quite good at visualising things, and they quite like colourful, attractive surroundings. Okay, so you can also pick on some clues, like kind of the neuro-linguistic programming type of clues and tricks to look for in here, because you'll hear visual learners say, how does that look? Do you see what I mean? This looks right to me. And just by using that language, they're giving away, aren't they, some tricks about, oh, which is the best way to appeal to these people. Okay, so listen out to what your learners are saying, and you can get some clues as well. Okay. So increasing learning power by making things visual for the learners, writing things down, keeping things colourful. So on my desk, I've got a million post-its in a million different colours and all different colour pens and all those kind of things to make things visual for my learners. So helping them to watch something and get that kind of a vision of what it is they're learning. Okay, this, I think my son must be a visual learner as well, because he's always been accused of daydreaming. Maybe he's just a visual learner. Okay, so looking for inspiration, looking out the window, but actually visualizing the thing that you're being told about. Okay, so some tips for trainers here when they're working with visual people. Okay, so the second type, excuse me, auditory learners. So they're good at hearing things, tuning into things, listening to what's going on around them. And they don't mind if the trainer talks a bit in their sessions. They like discussion and kind of listening into what people are thinking about. Okay, they don't mind answering questions if questions get asked, and they're fully involved if, you know, we're reading things, we're talking about things, we're verbalising the things that we're trying to learn about. Okay, so, oh, I hear what you're saying, that sounds brilliant, listen, I've got something to tell you. All those little tricks that we can start to pick up on to tell if we've got an auditory learner. And again, the guys will email the questionnaire that goes with this to you after the session, and you might be able to pick up what you are and what some of your colleagues are as well. Okay, and finally the kinesthetic learners, a bit like our activists really and our pragmatists, learning by doing, feeling things, touching things, physically touching the things that you're engaging with. So these might be the people, if we're in the classroom, that grab the marker pen, you know, and start to record things, and they're sticking the post-it notes up on the board. They're actively involved in things. Okay, so too much sitting is not good for those people. So breaks and opportunities to move around are really important. Short breaks every 15 to 20 minutes. Gosh, that's quite a big stretch, isn't it, when you're thinking about structuring a training course. Since we've gone online, we try and give our learners a break every 50 minutes. So we kind of have 50 minutes of learning and then 10 minutes of break every hour. And that seems to work quite well. But we do recognise kind of sitting in front of a machine can be really exhausting, actually. So finding ways to keep people active is really, really important. Okay, so your kinesthetic learners won't like sitting still for too long. And, you know, we know it ourselves, don't we? We start to feel a little bit, oh, things are washing over us. We reach for our phone or what have you. So trying to kind of keep things active and physical and keep things moving is really important for this type of learner. Okay. So different types of learner, and I've touched on it. Learning remotely brings some challenges, but it also brings some opportunities as well. So one of the things that I've noticed really over the summer, since we've kind of adopted remote training, has been people have the opportunity to work together they might not have had before, you know. So we're merging groups from, you know, Hong Kong and the UK, albeit those sessions are quite early in the morning, or, you know, from the US and the UK, and those are the late night ones. But they get the opportunity to connect, and, you know, we might have been doing it a bit before, but we weren't doing as much of it, certainly. Okay, so they do provide opportunities for connection and communication, particularly when people are, you know, having their camera on and they're kind of actively involved in a piece of learning as well. So when we're training remotely, we tend to use quite a lot of active exercises and online tools that our users can play with. And, you know, we talked about practicing an improvement tool. We've got some tools and techniques that can allow people to do that, such as Jamboard or Mural, so that they can, you know, actively populate a whiteboard while they're in the training room, albeit that they're at their desk. Okay, so regular and timely feedback. So it's good to know what's working and what's not for people. So encouraging feedback, and that can be done anonymously through a tool like Jamboard, or kind of on a more formal basis. But it's always a bit of a shame if we wait to the end and find it's not working for people. So kind of regular, timely feedback, so we can do something about it before it's too late, is important. In the training room, I used to talk about when you go home tonight, and this is for kind of a longer than a day long course, but it's the doorway of happiness. So leave me some messages about what you want to be the same or different tomorrow, more of or less of, and that kind of thing. And actually we're doing those on a more frequent basis now, so we might do it every coffee break and just keep getting the input from people, because we just don't want to lose them, and it's much easier, isn't it, to get distracted in a you know, when you're sitting in your own home with all of those distractions that go with it. Okay, so yeah, flexibility and pacing. We recognise that people's attention spans are quite different. So being able to kind of pace things and structure things differently, and we've certainly changed some of our training courses, because we recognise where we used to have a learner in for 7 hours, it's just too much when we're trying to do things virtually. It's just exhausting. So breaking things up into smaller size chunks for people and allowing those breaks. And I always say to people on their break, please don't look at your phone, go and stick your head out the window, look at something green, look at something natural, give your eyes a break from the screen, stand up and have a stretch, you know, give yourself the best possible opportunity for learning. Okay, and maybe it's an opportunity as well that traditional hours don't apply. So I've been up delivering training at 7 in the morning to groups of people from, you know, Hong Kong and Shanghai, and some of my colleagues have been working till 8 o'clock at night with groups from the US. Oh, it's it breaks the boundaries right down. It makes a lot of things possible, doesn't it? So yeah, traditional hours don't necessarily apply, but just recognising people can't go for a full day will just kill them off, really. Okay, and then managing the social and emotional experience is a bit more challenging. So much easier when you can see people and you have those opportunities for little informal chats around the training course as well. What we tend to find in the classroom when we have a coffee break, people will stick around and talk and ask a question and have a kind of an informal chat, and it's a really nice way of getting to know them. While we're online, if I say, oh, here's a 10-minute coffee break, everyone's off, you know, into the kitchen, and I can't blame them at all. But we do miss some of those kind of social interactions. So trying to kind of find ways to build those in and create the you know, the connections with people and build relationships with people is really important. Just a bit more of a challenge, I think, when we're working in this way. Okay. Excuse me. So Different types of learner that we come across will have different needs, and learning is all about diversity when you think about it, because we've already seen such a range of different learning styles and preferences. And we also need to recognise that our older learners will have different needs than our younger learners as well. So this might be particularly relevant if you have apprentices in the organisation, or if you're thinking about a Kickstart placement, recognising the difference really between our younger folk and our older folk when it comes to learning. Okay, and actually a lot of the challenges almost come from the older learners in a way, who might be feeling anxious about learning, because obviously with learning you're recognizing that you don't know something, and that can feel quite uncomfortable for some people. So it's almost like you're making yourself vulnerable, aren't you, by coming along to learn something, and you're kind of having your age-old kind of models and values challenged sometimes by different ways of learning and different ways of thinking. So they can be quite nervous or anxious about this. And again, kind of we'd want the trainer to create the environment of psychological safety so that it's okay to be vulnerable, you know, you feel supported in a training course. Whereas for our younger ones, I guess they're closer to it. They've been in this environment more recently than we have. They've spent a lot of their recent years in this kind of learning environment. It comes quite naturally to them. It's a social experience. They're used to learning with others around them and tend to feel more relaxed about things. And I think this is closely linked to the next point actually. So our older learners have kind of a lifetime of knowledge and experience, and they're connecting what we're telling them back to what they know and what they've observed and what they've done in their life, in their role, etc. Whereas younger learners don't necessarily have that experience. So it's up to the trainer to kind of build bridges between what we're learning about and, you know, their own experiences and interests. Okay, so building the bridges, taking them back to a scheme of knowledge that they might be more familiar with, making links for them is really important. Okay. You'll find that older learners are typically kind of find it easier to self-learn, so they can set themselves learning objectives and kind of make things happen. They're quite happy to kind of go off and take responsibility for their learning. Whereas younger ones, and this is how they were schooled, wasn't it? An adult has been telling them what to do and telling them what the syllabus is. So it might be quite a big leap from being told what you're going to learn to, well, you tell me what you want to learn then, you know. So it's a world apart. So what we can do for those is kind of help them, you know, to set goals and work to them and think about their own learning objectives more clearly. Okay, yeah, so excuse me. Older learners will be more self-directed and goal-orientated, whereas the younger ones do require a bit more direction from us. Okay, older ones you might find are more skeptical because they have that lifetime of experience, and they might be wary or skeptical about things that you're telling them, which kind of contradicts and goes against what they've learned so far, or what they believe in, or what their values might be. So sometimes it's like they've gone about doing something their whole life this way, and then you come along and tell them there's a different way, and that can be quite tough to take, really. So they'd really want to know that you are a credible individual that kind of has the appropriate kind of qualifications and experience to be telling them this. And if you lose that credibility, it's really difficult for older learners with this kind of skepticism to be accepting of those new models, whereas younger ones, a bit more like an open book really, generally more accepting of new information. They're getting new information fed to them all the time yet, and they haven't necessarily had an experience that would contradict it. They're still forming their views, aren't they? They're still forming their values really. So yeah, where your older learners, you might find them more critical of teaching methods, whereas your young people will accept them readily and gladly, and that's lovely. Okay, so then thinking about kind of diversity as well, your young people are used to working with people in a classroom, people the same age as them, you know, people with the same they're for example, they're a year 12, and they're used to working with year 12s, rather than adult learners who come into a classroom or to an online experience with all sorts of different people from all over the world, maybe with lots of different experience, who might look different to them and have different qualifications or different expectations to those that they have. Okay, so again, kind of making it kind of encouraging connections and a social and emotional experience is really important for those guys as well. So you can see how a lot of this stuff fits together, doesn't it, quite nicely. All of this stuff is interlinked. Okay, and just a couple of pointers on induction training, and this is particularly relevant for people that might be taking on a person from the Kickstart scheme, or has an apprentice or a new employees working within their organisation right now. Okay, so a couple of things to talk to you about here. So this idea of induction training, again, that process word, it's a process, it's not just a one-off activity. Okay, so if you think about yourself on your first day at work and what was most important to you at that time, gosh, if you thought you had to learn everything that was being told to you in one session and that was all you were going to get, that's quite overwhelming, really, and off-putting. Okay, so this is a process, so breaking things down into phases rather than doing it all in one go, I think is really important, and also recognizing that that support at the beginning, during and after the training as well, and when does induction training end, so thinking about the induction period rather than your corporate kind of day of training or whatever it might be. Okay, so breaking it down into chunks is really, really important. People might feel a bit overwhelmed, mightn't they, coming into a new role. Gosh, will I be able to get the train okay on the way home tonight? Will I make it? Will I be able to pick my child up easily? Or where's the toilet? Where's the kitchen? All those really simple, important things are going through their mind. So it's a really good, it's good to start with those things, really, and just build on them so your learner is comfortable, really. It's almost like the hierarchy of needs, isn't it? They're getting to kind of physical safety and comfort as a basis that everything else can be built on. Okay, so yeah, one size doesn't fit all either. So we've spoken a bit about the different learning styles. I guess we also need to recognise that different roles might have different requirements when it comes to inductions as well. So a couple of images on the slide you might be wondering about. First of all, the trainer. It's quite a jazzy trainer, isn't it? That one, the leopard skin trainer. And this kind of is a reminder that learning doesn't always have to happen in the classroom or in the training room or through the Zoom meetings. There are lots of different ways that can happen. So on the job coaching, mentoring, being given tasks and projects, actual things to do, and as a learning assignment, and then presenting back might be something. So kind of real physical, active ways of learning rather than just sitting, like a sponge, being expected to soak up loads and loads of new stuff. Okay, and the trainer reminds me of the Japanese concept of Gemba Genbutsu, which means just get out to the real place where the work gets done. Okay, so getting out to where the work gets done is far better than sitting around the boardroom table talking about how the work gets done. Okay, so it's physical and real, it's in the appropriate environment. Okay, you might even involve your inductees in customer or supplier visits, or give them placements in other teams so they can get a whole kind of understanding of how everything in the organisation fits together. But you probably don't want to do that too soon because they need to be comfortable in their bit first. And then the glasses is really just about the value of a new pair of eyes in the organisation as well. So by having a new person that we're inducting in, gosh, we've got an observer, we've got a person that could probably ask us some really good questions. Why do you do it like that? And they're closer, I guess, to the outside world than any of us are, because they've been out there more recently than we have. So asking them, what do you think about this? How does this compare to what you might have done before? How does this compare to what you learned about, in college? And all those kind of things are really, really useful questions. So you're encouraging your new people to, provide output, aren't you? They're questioning, they're actively involved, and they're considered as a useful source of knowledge, and that's really great to be considered as one of those. Okay, so think about induction training, just a massive opportunity, isn't it, really, to involve a new person, a new pair of eyes, and really get them to feel comfortable and immerse them in our organisation, and also get the value from them and their knowledge. Absolutely. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the slides, and if you have got any questions or comments, it'd be really great to hear those now. If you wanted to type something in, or if you wanted to raise your hand and come off mute and ask the question or make a comment, that would be most welcome. Or you might be a reflector. So the materials will be sent out to you by the Oxlep team after the session. So you might want to think about taking things on board and having a deeper think about some of the things or the related issues that we've spoken about today. So do you have any questions or thoughts?
Thank you, Jo. I've got one question come in. Do you think it's a good idea for a new apprentice or somebody on a new placement with you to do those couple of questionnaires that you talked about, so that you've got an idea about what kind of learner they are to help you when you're training them in the workplace?
I always find it, if I'm training someone, to be honest, the more I know about them, the better things can be, really. So I think, yeah, it's useful. You don't want to make an industry out of it, obviously. We've got things to do, but it can be really useful to pick one, or do Honey and Mumford or do Vark. You don't want to kind of do a whole psychological profile necessarily, but finding their preference can be really, really helpful. You kind of know a bit more about the person that you're getting then, don't you? And how to get fulfill all of their potential while they're with you. So yeah, I'd recommend it, actually. So the links in the presentation and the additional materials will provide maybe a bit of a starting point for that. That's a good question. Thank you,
Jo. Thank you. And one other question: do you have any top tips for encouraging younger learners maybe to be more independent in their learning? You were saying that people they're often used to being told. Any tips for encouraging them to kind of seek out their own learning opportunities or to become a little bit more independent?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think for younger learners coming in with no experience of setting their own learning objectives, it could be quite scary, couldn't it? So maybe providing them with a framework to use, or an example, or a case study might be quite helpful, to say, well, this learner was doing this role and went on to learn about, this, and this, and this is how they did it. And even things like, what does a learning objective look like, and thinking about, well, what do I want to learn and how will it help me, and how will I use that learning, in my role, is it takes a lot of thought, but it's quite empowering, isn't it, to be given that license for a young learner. So yeah, I think providing them with kind of the mechanisms and the support to be able to do so is brilliant. So some customers that I've worked with encourage people to do all different types of learning, whether it's knitting or climbing or whatever, as well as their business stuff, because they kind of recognise that all this stuff creates a person that brings more to work, really. Obviously, if your learner comes up with knitting and gets laughed at, that's not quite what we want them to be. So give them some guidelines and some boundaries for this kind of stuff. I think is really useful. Good question.
Thank you, Jo. Got one other question just coming in now. Do you have any examples of reflection techniques or logs?
Oh, that's a really good question. So for me as a trainer, and depending on the kind of interaction that we have with our customer kind of learners, sometimes we just train people and we don't know what happens next, and we go and we've done our bit and then we leave them to it, and then sometimes we come back and we coach and we support people after the training. And I have to say, where we do a bit of coaching and support, we normally find people seem to be a bit more effective, really, in terms of what they're doing. So I think setting some targets for them, and that just might be to apply a tool that they've learned about, or talk to a person that's an expert on this stuff. So kind of creating an action plan after learning, I think, is a really, really good idea.
Thank you, Jo. We haven't got any more questions coming now. Did anybody else want to ask anything? Pop your hand up, or pop a question in the questions box, or one more. Oh, Hannah says thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for your question. I think that's all the questions.
Yeah, it's been really nice talking to people this afternoon. So you will have that reflection opportunity now. And if you do want to keep in touch about any of this stuff, there's LinkedIn and there's the Oxlab team who are fantastic. So yeah, lots of support for you. Okay, so I'm going to end the session then. So thank you all for your questions and your listening time this afternoon. It's much appreciated. Okay.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you for joining us.